Order, and welcome to today's session of the Energy Security and Net Zero Select Committee. Welcome to the Secretary of State and to the Permanent Secretary who are giving evidence as part of our ongoing inquiry into the work of the Department. Before I ask the Secretary of State to make an opening statement, I'm going to welcome our new member, Mike Reeder, who joins us for the first time today, and a thank you to Julie Minns, who's ended her service on the committee. And we are joined today, and you're very welcome, Barry Gardner, who's guesting from the Environmental Audit Committee as well. So, Ed Miliband, I know you're going to make an opening statement before we get into questioning, and perhaps you'll consider this in making the statement. You said in the House of Commons before Christmas that one of the benefits of coming back to the job, having done the previous role some years ago, last time Labour were in office, is that you've been able to learn from the mistakes last time and hopefully apply the lessons. So perhaps you can refer to the lessons you've learned that put you in a better place this time around in your opening statement.
Well, thank you so much, Chair. And can I just say it's a great pleasure to be before the committee today, making my first appearance and under your chairmanship. And I look forward to working closely with all the members of the committee. I wanted, if I may, just to start by setting out the thinking behind what we're trying to do as a department, just for your benefit. As you know, we lead the Prime Minister's mission to make Britain a clean energy superpower, one of the Prime Minister's 5 missions, and that is about 2 things. It's about achieving clean power by 2030 and accelerating to net zero. And I think it's really important to say to the committee that our work starts from the everyday experience of the British people who saw energy bills rocket following Russia's invasion of Ukraine. And every family and business in the country has paid the price for our dependence on fossil fuel markets that are controlled by petrostates and dictators. And it's that dependence that led directly to the cost of living crisis, which harmed family finances, business finances, and frankly, the public finances. And indeed, we've seen movements in those fossil fuel markets since July, which has led to the rise in the energy price cap. And it's really important to say, but this is the core from which much else proceeds, Chair, that it's the roller coaster of fossil fuel markets that we are subject to, over which we have no control. And there is an answer to this, in our view, which is clean homegrown power we control. The right thing for energy security, for bringing down bills for good, for creating good jobs, and for tackling the climate crisis. A crisis, and I'll just, if I may say something about that, which is not some theoretical prospect, but we see playing out all around us, including the devastating scenes we're seeing in Los Angeles. And I think in the future, people will look back at this time and ask if we acted with the urgency that the situation demanded. And it's very much the urgency of those challenges on energy security and climate and the opportunities there are in relation to jobs, which has led us to move at speed to deliver in our first 6 months. Maybe one of the lessons I learned from the last time in office is move quickly and move fast and build things, as we like to say. So we've lifted the onshore wind ban, we've consented nearly 2 gigawatts of solar, we've set up Great British Energy in our National Wealth Fund, we've overseen the most successful renewables auction in our country's history, we've kicked off our Warm Homes Plan, we've launched Britain's carbon capture and hydrogen industries, and in December we published our plan, Exhibit A, to deliver clean power by 2030. Now, of course, Chair, this is just the start of our work. And I think it's right to say to the committee, it's a challenging mission that we have. But what we've sought to do over the last 6 months is shown the way that political leadership and a sense of mission can galvanise not just government, but business as well, and indeed trade unions and civil society, to sometimes do the things that people thought weren't possible. It's also right to say there are people who oppose our mission, siren voices who would defend the status quo despite the disastrous effects it's had on the British people, who say we'd be better off gambling on fossil fuel markets. I have to say I believe that would be a betrayal of working people and leave our country exposed. And the last 6 months have made me only more determined that we need to rise to the challenges we face, not shrink from them, because as a government we are determined to fight for working people. And I would just add this finally, Chair, as I reflect, because I'm an old stager by now, as I reflect on addressing these issues around climate and energy over the last 18 years, I actually think this country has been at its best when it's worked across party on these issues. that the gains we have made, because these are long-term issues, have been across party. And, absolutely, I want to work with people across political parties where we can. And that's very much the spirit in which I approach the committee's work.
Well, thank you very much, Secretary of State, for your opening statement. I thought it was very interesting what you said at the end there about the need to work cross-party, because, of course, this isn't just about one parliament or one party, as you say. What can you do to recreate that consensus?
I think it's probably slightly heroic to think I can recreate it on my own, but it takes two to consensus maybe, or lots of people. But I think there is a serious point here, which is that we passed the Climate Change Act in 2008, but with a vast majority in this House. And I think that has served us well, and it continues to serve us well. And, there are, people from the Conservative Party whose work, I admire in terms of what they've done. Alok Sharma, I don't know whether he'll thank me for saying it, but Alok Sharma, for example, now Lord Sharma, the work he did as chair of COP26, Theresa May, who I shared a platform with at the end of last year, after COP29, who put net zero into law. So, I think we have prided ourselves, frankly, as a country, on not making climate and energy a culture war issue. And I think it would serve us well, and indeed, if I have some advice for some of our political opponents, it would serve them well too, because I don't think the British people want a culture war on these issues. I think the British people think we should be, whatever political party they support, think we should be tackling these issues. We should be doing so in a way that also helps tackle the cost of living crisis. But I think that whatever background you're from, whatever party you support, you recognise the scale of the long-term challenge and threat we face.
Thank you very much. You were kind enough to say that you're keen to work with the committee, and we very much want to work with you. We've been scrutinising your arm's length bodies and the rest of the department, as you will know. Do you agree that it is beneficial for you and your department to give as much information to me as chair and to the officials who support the work of the committee in a timely fashion, including for statements, both oral and indeed written statements in the House? Is that something you're prepared to commit to?
Definitely.
Okay, that was easy.
I mean, look, I think I think the work chair of your committee is really, really important, and we want to keep you as well informed as we possibly can. You have a really important role in scrutinising our work. Hopefully, as a collective, supporting our work where you think we're getting it right. Of course, challenging us where you think we're getting it wrong. Helping advise us, frankly. This is, and the Permanent Secretary and I discussed this quite a lot, we are undertaking a massive transformation of our country here. I don't think we shouldn't pretend this is easy. This is hard. And if it had been easy, it would have been done 20, 30, 40 years ago. So there is no monopoly of wisdom. We won't get everything right. And we absolutely want to work with you and the members of your committee.
Thank you very much for that commitment, and I look forward to the rest of the session, and I'll take questions from my colleagues on the committee. And the first question is from Chris Chope.
Secretary of State, in your 2008 Act,
yes,
you put a lot of emphasis on the need for adaptation and for building resilience measures. You haven't mentioned that in your opening remarks, and you will know that the Climate Change Committee is extremely critical of the lack of progress on that front. And bearing in mind that the Environmental Audit Agency, the Environment Agency, said in December that they were expecting by 2050 that 1 in 4 properties in England will be vulnerable to flooding. What are you doing to ensure that the government invests sufficiently in flood defences?
Well, look, Sir Christopher, I know from reading the testimony of Emma Pinchbeck to your committee that this is something you've taken an interest in, and I think we should just be frank about this, that this has for too long been somewhat of an orphan in government. It's led, as you will know, and indeed I think you expressed some concern about this, it's led not by my department but by DEFRA, working with the Cabinet Office. But look, I can certainly agree with you at a general level that as we think about the effects of the climate crisis already in the system, if you like, this is something which needs much greater focus from government. I think we should be frank also that this is something which requires significant levels of investment at a time when the public finances, as you know, are incredibly tight. But this is a really, really important project, and I think it's something the government needs. And I'm happy to play my part in this. Something that the government needs to give proper attention to, because I don't think it's had the attention it deserves in the past.
So, if the government was to decide that investing in adaptation and resilience measures should take priority over some of the capital programmes in your budget, you would go along with that, would you, on the basis that adaptation and resilience are of much greater significance for the ordinary people, you describe the working people, than issues around reducing CO2 emissions? Because since 1990, we've reduced our CO2 emissions by half, but it hasn't made a ha'porth of difference to the impact of climate change on ordinary people in this country. So we've got surely to put our priority in adaptation and resilience measures.
I think you're going to be frustrated with my answer, Sir Christopher. I think we've got to do both, because look, we could give up on measures on tackling greenhouse gas emissions, but I think that would be grossly irresponsible, because the way I think about this is obviously Britain on its own can't tackle the climate crisis. You're absolutely right to say that. We're 1% of global emissions. But the decisions we make have a massive effect on our ability to influence others to also act. And let me just give you a very clear example of this. When we passed the 2008 Climate Change Act, it was emulated around the world. So it didn't just have an effect in Britain, it had an effect elsewhere. I think there's something like 25 other equivalents of the Climate Change Committee in different countries of the world. If we achieve clean power by 2030 as the mission of our government, it will send a message to the rest of the world about what is possible. So it's a frustrating answer to you, but I don't think there's any other option, and I don't think there's any other responsible option other than doing both of these things.
But you're ducking in the question about adaptation and resilience, because we used to be global leaders in adaptation and resilience, and the Climate Change Committee says that we have fallen behind on that. And you are not prepared to, it seems, to say publicly that you believe that adaptation and building resilience is and should be a top priority, because back in 1953, as you will recall,
in around in 1953. Not suggesting you were actually.
In the Netherlands, there were 2,000 people killed as a result of flooding. We've got similar problems now in the United States, masses of people being killed as a result of the consequences of climate change. Are you really going to stand there and say that this government is going to ignore the priorities which have been identified by the Environment Agency, and to prevent, and the need to prevent 1 in 4 households, it's about 8 million people, being vulnerable to flooding by 2050, whatever happens?
Absolutely not, Sir Christopher. And you and I, and if my answer wasn't clear to you, you and I share absolutely a commitment that we need to act, and this government has a commitment to act on flood defences and all of the issues that you say. But so there we agree. But if you want to then suggest to me that we should throw under the bus the idea that we should tackle greenhouse gas emissions as the price of that, that's where I'm going to part company with you.
I'm not suggesting that, but what I am suggesting is that you should be willing, as a member of the government, to insist that greater priority should be given to investment
Absolutely,
in adaptation and resilience, even if it means having to cut back on some of your own ambitions in your own department.
I don't think that would be a responsible course of action, Sir Christopher. And I think you are posing a false choice. And I think if we say to the British people, just to step outside this committee for a minute, if we say to the British people, should we tackle the threat of climate change that it's going to pose to people's way of life, they'd say absolutely. But if we also said to them, in adapting to that threat, we're going to not do anything about the threat growing bigger and bigger, i.e. therefore making the need for adaptation more and more expensive, they'd say, well, that can't be right. I mean, that's the whole point here, which is, and this is, if you like, the starting point for much of our discussions. The key insight of Nick Stern in the 2000s, the Stern report, was the costs of not acting on climate change are greater than the costs of acting.
Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Secretary of State. Sir Christopher has given an example of what can go wrong when the questions are too long and we don't get such long answers. But perhaps we will learn from that example.
It's a bit harsh, if I may say it on him. To defend a member of your committee, Chair.
I'm very pleased you were. Josh McAllister, please.
Thank you, Chair, and thank you to Ed and Jeremy for coming to the committee, and also thank you for your leadership on these issues and the energy that you've brought to them. I think in the first 6 months you've shown what government's capable of doing, and we've got a really clear plan and energy behind it. I want to ask about planning reform, because it's key to any of the clean energy infrastructure projects that we need to get off the ground, both for the 2030 mission, but also broader energy and net zero goals. And to ask whether you think on the detailed components of planning reform, so whether it be judicial review changes, habitat regulation changes, DCOs, the sort of full shop front of the planning system that we have, which the government recognises is not fit for purpose, but whether we are moving at the pace that's needed, working back from 2030 to actually have that new planning regime in place so that the clean energy infrastructure projects can be built in the next 6 to 24 months, which is what we're going to need. Is the urgency and is the pace there across government to make that happen?
Absolutely, and thank you for what you said. But absolutely, look, planning reform, and I'm very pleased you've asked about it, is absolutely crucial. And we are determined to rewire the planning system from end to end, including through the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, which will be coming in the next few months, on which we've been working very closely with MHCLG. Let me just sort of briefly try and paint a picture of the changes that we are sort of embarked upon in relation to this, because it might just crunch down at what can be a rather abstract subject for the committee. Look, first of all, we need to be clear about the projects we need. So if we take, for example, transmission, so the building of the grid and substations and so on, it's somewhere between 70 and 80 projects that we need. So we're clear about the projects we need. Secondly, we need planning inspectors to have clear direction when it comes to making decisions. So that's why our energy policy statements, our national policy statements, will have the 2030 Clean Power Mission as a key feature of it. Third, we're working with MHCLG to ensure that organisations across the planning system can better prioritise their resources so that 2030 gets the priority it deserves. Fourthly, and you raise this, we have an endless cycle of judicial review at the moment. I think it was Lord Banner who did a report under the consultation under the previous government as an important report, and we're currently looking at how we act on that. And then fifthly, we want to ensure that communities directly benefit from hosting clean energy infrastructure. Now, there's much more I could say about this on onshore wind, where we've overturned the ban and we've got a new national consenting system for over 100 megawatt projects, but that paints a picture, hopefully, of the changes we want to see. So the whole of the planning system needs change, and actually some of the best work that's been done on this is the National Infrastructure Commission, which have looked at the way in which the planning system has become not fit for purpose.
Can I follow up on what Josh asked in relation to that? So that's a very helpful answer in relation to the land use framework, which I think actually formally sits in DEFRA, but obviously will need to integrate or have some kind of relationship with your energy spatial framework. Partly, how much is the energy spatial framework and the land use framework and indeed the planning reforms, considering the role of nature in mitigating climate, and how much do you see that as part of your role, bearing in mind you've got overall responsibility for net zero, not mitigating climate change, as well as obviously managing adaptation, as per what Sir Christopher said. And to put that also in the context of when you're doing the land use framework, we've got that target of 2030, which is in planning terms round the corner. How do you anticipate being able to establish a land use framework which has got the public consent and support of people about how we agree what land is used for what, in order for us to be able to reach those targets and ensure that we are using nature appropriately to be able to mitigate climate change? Otherwise, what I'm concerned about is it will be like putting loads of clean energy projects in to mitigate climate change, when actually we might have been able to leave some of that land free to mitigate climate change just as well, or maybe even better.
I mean, let me just sort of deal with the two parts, I think, to the question. First, on the land use framework, this is an incredibly important piece of work that my colleague Steve Reed has embarked upon, setting out, I think clearly, I think for the first time, the role of farming and agriculture, the role of nature restoration, the role of, for example, renewable energy. And I think that is a very important framework, partly, if I'm frank with you, to give reassurance to people, and some of the scare stories there are, which I think are very wide of the mark, for example, about solar and the use of solar, because solar is, on any, even the most ambitious scenario, is going to be a very marginal part of the use of land, and certainly doesn't imperil our food security. So I think as a sort of framework, what Steve has embarked upon is very, very important. I just want to come straight to your issue of public consent, though, because I think it is really, really important to confront it head on. The case we're making to people is threefold, and it a little bit speaks to my answer to Josh. Look, first of all, if we don't build this infrastructure, we are deeply vulnerable as a country to a repeat of the cost of living crisis that we have seen. And it's incredible how quickly, I don't think the British people forget, but in a way Westminster can forget this, and people are this still stalks people's lives today, the cost of living crisis. So unless we do this, we remain vulnerable to the fossil fuel market. Secondly, the biggest threat to the countryside, it speaks to the conversation with Sir Christopher, is the climate crisis. That is the biggest threat. It's not some pylons. It's not solar farms. The biggest threat to the countryside is the climate crisis. And thirdly, Polly, I think also it is important. I just want to re-emphasise what I said to Josh. We do need a bargain with people where we say, if you host this clean energy infrastructure, you will see benefit. You will see benefit to your community. And I actually think there is a big majority of people who will come with us on this. Of course, people worry about these things, and of course, people need to have a say, but I think we can bring people with us.
Thank you.
May I just add, one of the things that we are doing as part of Clean Power 2030, but also looking to the future into the 2030s, is increasing the use of spatial planning. So the department, working closely with the system operator and DEFRA, are working very closely to coordinate the strategic spatial energy plan with the land use framework, and also how we see the marine environment as well, to make sure that we are coordinating the different uses of land in order to achieve these different goals.
Thank you. I'm being urged to move on. I'll just make the observation that in the letter to NESO, the role of nature in climate mitigation was not mentioned, and I think that's something that I would like to see the departments collaborate on. I'm being nudged by the chair to move on to questions around solar and renewables. Now, solar energy...
Before you do, we'll ask you, we'll follow up in writing on any number of things,
course,
undoubtedly, so we can pick this up in more detail.
That's absolutely fine.
Polly.
So as you'll be aware, Solar Energy UK has pressed for a solar target range of up to 60 gigawatts to drive growth and send positive signals to investors. Why, therefore, have you set a lower range of 45 to 47 gigawatts when this has already been heavily criticised by the industry?
I think it's really important to... I'll come to that specific question in a second. I think it's really important to say that what we're doing in this document is quite path-breaking, because what we're actually doing is setting out for the first time the energy mix we need to meet clean power. Now, I don't want to be overly party political in this, but that wasn't done before. And the reason why that is so important is because unless we do that, how are people, business, industry, others going to sort of plan for what the system looks like? And once we have those range is in place, and we are putting them in place, we then will make sure that the grid, which is frankly a massive problem, as you will know at the moment, the planning system, the skills, the supply chains are in place to meet the target. So it's a much more, it's what I call plan and build, not neglect and delay. Now come to your solar issue. The action plan range is 45 to 47 gigawatts of solar. It's important to say that there's some solar that is outside this. So NESO's work with the distribution network operators suggests a further 9 to 10 gigawatts of rooftop solar projects which could be on top of this. So actually, the range that we're talking about is a sort of larger number than the 45 to 47 headline. But
just to clarify, that's, in some ways the 45 to 47 is a floor,
exactly,
rather than a target.
Exactly.
Well, how do you make that?
And it would
make that a reality?
It is worth also saying that this, even the floor, will involve almost trebling the amount of solar power from today. So we're talking about a big increase. In answer to your how do we make this a reality? Well, look, this is one of the issues, and it's something I get asked about a lot by people. This is something we're working on with MHCLG, which is when it comes to the Future Home Standard, making sure that, for example, solar plays a really, really important role, and those discussions are carrying on in government, and I know there is real enthusiasm for this in MHCLG. So, and we've got our solar task force, as you will know, Polly, which is working on all of these issues. I'm incredibly excited about what we can do in terms of solar. Not just ground-mounted solar, but also a real rooftop revolution.
Okay, well, the developers say that your plan is wildly unrealistic in relying on the distribution networks to deliver that 75% of solar capacity. How much have you consulted with industry on this?
Well, we're absolutely hand in glove with industry because they're in our solar task force. And this is something which the previous government was working on, but I wanted to make sure that we were at the maximal end of ambition when it came to solar, and that is the work we're embarked upon, and in the coming months we'll publish our solar roadmap as part of that task force. I think we'll probably
want to know a little bit more about why you've decided that distribution networks would be the people to deliver that 75% of solar capacity when the developers think that's unrealistic. So, I mean, we can write further on that, I think, can't we?
We can, and we will. I mean, I hear from developers who are being told it's years before they can turn their solar arrays on. Well, because of the distribution networks being unable to take the capacity.
Yeah.
I mean, look, I think there is a broader point here which I just want to sort of touch upon, which is the delay, the grid delays that we've got in general are enormous, and that's because we had a first come first served system, and we've ended up with more than 700 gigawatts of capacity for queuing up in the system, and lots of capacity which actually isn't needed for 2030. And so I think it's really, really important the committee understands this. We're doing something quite different, which we're being much more intentional about this. We're saying, what is the mix we need, including by region, to meet this 2030 clean power target, and how do we make it happen? We've moved from a very chaotic, frankly, first come, first served approach, which wasn't really serving anyone, and was producing massive delays. I think is it 70 months averaged waiting time in relation to queuing, up massively, up 4 or 5-fold in the last few years, to a much more intentional. Now, some people will therefore have to wait their turn, and I'm afraid that is sort of tough because we have a national interest here.
I'm really interested in that intentional approach, because it is obviously very different from what you've done before. But some people have said that your deployment targets for renewables effectively ban certain technologies from connecting to large parts of the grid. I mean, for example, there's a lot of opportunity, developers would say, for solar in Lincolnshire, but they've been told that it's not going to happen there. Are you concerned about losing investor confidence because developers are going to have to write off projects that they've been working on? Well,
look, that is certainly not what we're. I don't believe that's what's going to happen. I know you had Vinton Sly before the committee on this, and some of the concerns that there were in the solar industry, I think, have been reassurance has been provided in terms of some of the grandfathering that there has been. But look, inevitably, if you are reordering we could decide not to reorder the queue, and I know you're not suggesting this, but we could just leave this in place, and then frankly we won't meet the targets we have. Or we can have a grid system that actually serves the country properly and a queuing system that serves the country properly. That is the decision that we've made. And inevitably you'll get people making the case for their own technologies. That's totally understandable. And obviously the dialogue with all of the industries is really important.
Thank you very much. We'll move on to the next set of questions, Secretary of State. Last week we had 2 power plants who were charging, according to some reports, up to 100 times the market price for gas. Should they be able to do this?
Look, I think, of course, let me go to the bigger picture and then I'll come to your question, because I think if I'm frank with you, Chair, there's been quite a lot of nonsense talked about last week, and quite a lot of scaremongering, and I just do want to sort of deal with it directly. First of all, I want to quote the NESO. They said at no point were electricity supplies less than anticipated demand. So when people are scaremongering about, for example, blackouts, they're talking absolute nonsense. As the NESO said, there's a very helpful blog that the NESO put out yesterday, which I recommend people read. Secondly, on gas, on the issue of gas storage, National Gas said the overall picture across Great Britain's 8 main gas storage sites remains healthy. So, and I do think this goes to my point in the opening, which is we should be working together on these issues. And I think there are people who want to try and sort of use and mislead about events that happen for their own purposes. And I think it's completely irresponsible, frankly. Look, on your question about the specific high price that was paid in relation to at a particular moment in the system, I don't really want to speculate on this. This is something that Ofgem and NESO Ofgem in particular, as the people running the system, will always be looking at. I think I'm right in saying that it's not completely unprecedented that in 2022 a higher price was paid for some capacity, but that isn't to say one should be complacent about these issues, and Ofgem will obviously look at them.
Okay, well, we have Ofgem next week, so we will ask them. Thank you very much. And what do you think will be a reasonable cost for maintaining dispatchable gas power generation by 2030?
Just explain your question, if you would, Chair.
Well, there's still going to be, under the Clean Power 2030 plan, there's going to be 5% dispatchable power. What do you think will be a reasonable price?
Look, I think it goes to the overall picture of bills and so on. Look, the key thing about this, and again, I've read some of your testimony on this and your evidence, we said in our manifesto that a clean power system, and this is the CCC definition and others, always has a strategic reserve of gas on the system. The key question is not the overall capacity of that system, 30-ish gigawatts, it's how often it's used. And so having that capacity in the system is important because it is dispatchable power. It's sort of one option for when for when it's required. There are other options too. Now that dispatchable power can also be low carbon with CCS, and I know you want to come on to CCS in a moment. But I think the key thing is that having that on the system is the right thing to do.
Cool. Do you think there's a future role for GB Energy to take over the remaining gas power plants, to have gas as the strategic reserve that you've just set out as a cheaper way to current arrangements?
I mean, that's not the way we are thinking about the role of GB Energy at the moment. We have the capacity market to provide the dispatchable power that we need, and GB Energy we'll come on to this, but GB Energy has lots of other priorities it can have. So for the present time, we think actually the capacity market is the right way, with privately owned gas-fired power stations is the right way to go.
Okay, I'll ask you about REMA. What assessment, if any, have you carried out into how the delay in publishing the the findings of your inquiry into REMA and changes. What effect do you think that's having on investment in the sector?
Well, I actually think overall, what I pick up from the sector, and this isn't meant to sound complacent or self-congratulatory, but I think what I pick up from the sector is they want a sense of direction, and we are giving them a sense of direction. And going back to the conversation we had earlier, setting out the ranges of different technologies that we want is confidence building. Consenting the solar projects, which I did in my through the DCOs in my first week or so in office, was confidence building. Lifting the onshore wind ban was confidence building. I think the truth about REMA, that could be a whole hour and a half or day and a half in itself, is these are very, very complex issues and we want to get them right. You will know that at the time of the Clean Power Action Plan, we issued, if you like, a sort of narrowing of the choices when it came to REMA, to zonal pricing or national pricing, and what those two scenarios would look like. This is the consideration we're going to be giving during the course of the year. But I think we can absolutely inspire the confidence of investors and make a timely but not hasty decision when it comes to these very, very complex long-term issues of market reform that is really important that we get right.
Thank you very much. Claire Young, please.
Thank you. So turning now to long-duration electricity storage and batteries, do you think that the new cap and floor mechanism on its own is going to be enough to deliver the long-duration electricity storage we need by 2030? And is there more that your department could be doing to facilitate co-location of battery energy storage systems alongside generation?
Well, look, the first thing to say is that long-duration storage has an really important role to play in our mission, and it does enable the electricity system to store wind and solar power when it's plentiful and when it's most needed. It's also important to say that there hasn't been long-duration storage capacity built in a number of decades, actually. And I think that the cap and floor mechanism that we gave the green light to in October was really, really important. We're currently finalising the design of that, which we'll do in the first quarter. We're working with Ofgem in the first quarter of 2025, and we're going to be opening the scheme to a first round of applications in the second quarter of this year. So, you know, the Clean Power Action Plan has an important role for a long duration storage, and you know, we're confident that this cap and floor mechanism represents a real step forward, and we'll obviously have to see how it goes, but we think it's a really important.
It's worth saying we've consulted extensively with investors alongside Ofgem on the design of this scheme. Obviously, they will always want more, that's the nature, but we also have to protect the interests of consumers and bring forward the investment that we need. The cap and floor mechanism is, of course, well understood in the energy sector as well. It's applied elsewhere, for example, in interconnection as well, so it's already sort of well understood. Obviously, it needs to be adapted for long-duration energy storage. So this is the model that we are finalising with Ofgem does come from that extensive dialogue, which means that we are confident that we are heading in the right direction, but obviously we've got further work to do.
Thank you. And on the point around co-location of battery energy storage systems alongside generation, what you can do to facilitate that?
Why don't we write to you with a more detailed answer on that issue? And
finally, on battery storage, what impacts, you've talked about discussing how the industry and so on, what impact do you think that support for storage and battery storage systems will have on the costs of the Clean Power by 2030 mission?
Well, I think it's really interesting that you asked this question, because I think we have a tendency, I think, to think that the future is going to look like the past, and I actually think the role of batteries, long duration storage, consumer-led flexibility will play a much bigger role in the energy system than maybe some people anticipate. So I think there is real potential in these areas. I mean, often it's going to be grid-scale batteries, but sometimes the role of batteries in the home as well. And if you think about some of the challenges we face in system terms, I think the role of these technologies, and it's what I always say, we need all of these technologies at our disposal, but I think the role of these technologies is really, really important.
You don't think, though, so there'll be positives from potentially positives for the cost of energy for consumers, but also potentially cost of delivering this?
Look, I think then the overall sort of framework for this, I think it's worth. I know you had Fintan, as I said earlier, Fintan's slide before you. Look, I think that the NISO report was a really important conclusion that it reached, which is, even though there are significant costs to building a clean power system, because of the cheaper, and this is the central insight of our work, the cheaper wholesale costs you get from a clean power system mean there is scope for lower bills. And this is like the fundamental thing here. Because why is it that we say a clean power system is the way to bring down bills for good? Because we know that the wholesale costs of running a system which is based on a very renewables heavy system is going to be cheaper than running a system based on fossil fuels. You have more control and it's a cheaper system. So obviously there are costs of building the system, but this is the way to bring down bills for good, and batteries are definitely a part of it.
Thank you. Torkel Crichton.
Thank you, Chair. Thank you, Secretary of State and Permanent Secretary, for coming in, and for your bold opening statement and outlining the urgency of the mission, which maybe if time allows I'll return to. But you talked about siren voices as well in your opening statement, and I wonder if these siren voices include the Aberdeen Chamber of Commerce, for which read the North Sea oil industry, which wants to lift the presumption against oil and gas development, and whether the siren voices also include Donald Trump, who asked you to open up the North Sea and get rid of windmills. What do you say to Donald Trump, Secretary of State?
Look, I think let me sort of deal with that directly. The British people choose the government here, and the American people choose the American president. And I think it's really important for our country, whoever the president is, to work with them and find common ground. And no doubt there will be areas of disagreement with incoming President Trump. He will pursue his national interest. We will pursue our national interest. But I think it is an important responsibility of me, whoever the Energy Secretary is in the new incoming US administration, to find common ground.
Okay, that's the industry.
And I'll just say on the Aberdeen Chamber of Commerce, I don't include them in this. I think it's important for us to work with our North Sea communities, including the Aberdeen Chamber of Commerce, OE UK and others. And look, we may have slightly divergent perspectives on certain issues, but I think there is a lot of common ground that we share as well. I think there is common ground on the fact that the North Sea oil and gas will continue to play an important role in the decades ahead. I think there is important common ground that we must build the future for the North Sea. And the future is going to be in carbon capture and storage, offshore wind, hydrogen, the industries of the future. The truth is that the North Sea workforce has gone down by a third in around the last decade. And the reality is that unless we build those future industries, and I know that the committee's got some strong views on CCS, but unless we build the future, including carbon capture and storage, we're not going to have the right future for those communities. And a trade unionist put it very well to me around our North Sea communities, which is, he said to me, look, you should be saying, and so I am saying it, these are the communities that will decarbonise our country in the future. These are the communities, these are the workers who will decarbonise Britain, and I absolutely 100% believe that.
I'm glad you mentioned the workforce, because the rhetoric is good, the jargon is good, just transition, Office of Clean Energy, offshore skills passport. But how is this going to practically going to be done? What does a just transition mean for people who take helicopters into the North Sea for 3 weeks at a time just now?
Well, look, this is the right question, and this is something that we are determined to work on with industry, trade unions and workers. We'll be consulting soon on our licensing policy, but it's going to be much more than that. It's about how do we build this future. You mentioned the skills passport. The skills passport stuck for years in treacle, frankly, and we are hopefully later this month will be moving this forward with a prototype of what the skills passport looks like. The truth is, if you look at the Robert Gordon University research, there is massive scope for us to have positive job prospects, an increase in jobs for our offshore communities, given the future that I have talked about, but it requires the right institutions to make it happen. GB Energy, headquartered in Aberdeen, the National Wealth Fund, a clean industries bonus to actually say if you invest in UK manufacturing, you will get support. So all of those things together, the right institutions, the right form of dialogue, I think is the way to shape a good future for our North Sea communities.
Let's talk quickly and briefly about that sense of urgency. You mentioned trade unions. I declare my interest as a member of the GMB. Trade unions warn that your 2030 targets means that you'll be buying all this supply chains and manufacturing stuff off the shelf from other countries rather than building up the manufacturing base here. Also, left behind in your rush to 2030 might be communities. I'm intrigued about what you said about the planning and infrastructure bill and how you have to make a bargain with people. It has to be community benefit. I'd rather see community share, and in Denmark and Germany 20% is owned, each wind farm is owned by the local municipality or community. Will your planning bill include a 20% offer to municipalities, communities, and if not, why
I can't guarantee you of that, but I have read your questions and what you've said about this, and indeed you and I have talked about this community share issue, and I think it's a really interesting issue. And if you think about our local power plan, our GB Energy local power plan, it's absolutely about the idea. And if you talk to RWE, for example, they say, look, as a matter of course in other countries, for example, Germany, we might be building significant onshore wind, but some of it will be owned by the community. And I think absolutely community share and looking at the issue of community ownership will be part of our GB Energy local power plan. And we should be open to all of these issues because, part of what we want to do is show in practice that this change, this clean energy transition that we are embarked upon can have direct benefits for people. So I think it's an idea we should pursue.
And just quickly, on this worry about supply chain jobs and manufacturing jobs going abroad rather than coming here.
Look, here I think is the reality, which is the concentration in supply chains has been built up over a long period. And I'm afraid it's because the last government didn't take the view that we needed to build in Britain, or at least not sufficiently. I have a different view, which is it really matters that we build our own supply chains. It really, really matters because this is a massive jobs opportunity. And as Keir Starmer says, the Prime Minister says, why not us? That's why we're putting in these new institutions. But if people say to me, well, look, while you're putting in place these new institutions to build supply chains in the UK, why don't you sort of down tools, and I know you're not saying this, but down tools and wait until the supply chains in Britain are built and then get on with your thing? I think it'll be grossly irresponsible for the reasons that I've set out, because we're leaving ourselves exposed to the biggest energy security challenge we face, which is these fossil fuel markets, which we as a government have no control over.
Thank you. It's been put to me that there is a potential and a real concern that an early withdrawal from the North Sea will impact the total receipts from the energy profits levy and the other oil and gas related taxes. What is your response to that concern?
Look, I said to Talkwell that our dialogue with Aberdeen Chamber of Commerce, OE UK and others is really important, and it is partly that dialogue, and obviously I don't determine tax policy, and I should be very careful not to suggest I do. But that led to some changes in relation to capital allowances that were announced in the budget by the Chancellor. and that followed that dialogue. It's really, our manifesto was clear about this, which is we will keep existing oil and gas fields open for their lifetime, decades to come. We will not issue new licenses to explore new fields. And the truth is that new licenses to explore new fields are a relatively marginal part of the future prospects for the North Sea. It's really, but we are led by the science in saying that. And I think what's important to say is that we can both achieve the just transition that we seek and maintain confidence and indeed tax receipts in the North Sea, from the North Sea, and at the same time build the future in the way that I've talked about. And that's what we are determined to do.
Okay, thank you very much. Vera Hophouse, please.
Thank you, Chair. Welcome and thank you for coming, Secretary of State and Permanent Secretary. Can I commit you before I start of the real commitment of the Liberal Democrats to work cross-party on the challenges that you have set out at the beginning? And now saying that, I come to CCUS and asking a few questions around that. Why, given the large subsidies offered in the US on the technologies, is it necessary for money to be allocated for CCUS from the UK public rather than being spent on other goals or even simply returned to the exchequer?
Well, look, I said the committee has taken a keen interest in this, so I'm glad. And can I say that I very much enjoyed in the last Parliament working with you when you were the Liberal Democrat spokesperson, so it's good to work together again. I think it's really important to take this head on. All of the experts tell us that without CCUS, we are simply not going to achieve net zero as a country or as a world. The Climate Change Committee has said it is a necessity, not an option, to achieving net zero. The IEA has said reaching net zero will be virtually impossible without CCUS, pointing to heavy industries, and I quote, that account for almost 20% of global CO2 emissions today. And so, I think the first point to make to you is I understand some of the concerns of the committee, and maybe we'll get into this, but the science and the advice that we've got is very clear about the role of CCUS. And if you think about the NESO report, is interesting on this, because they said that actually relatively small amounts of dispatchable gas with CCUS or hydrogen to power can make a huge difference in obviating the need to build lots more renewables. If you think about their two pathways, which you'll be familiar with, there's a really important role that CCUS can play in delivering at least cost. And then thirdly, and sorry for the long answer, but thirdly, going back to the conversation with Torquil and indeed with the chair, if you think about building this just future, think about the North Sea. The North Sea has massive potential. We can be the world leader when it comes to this technology because we have a sort of heaven-sent opportunity to do this. And I think, therefore, it will be really irresponsible for us not to take advantage of this opportunity. And then on the costs, it's really important to say this because this headline figure of 21 billion has been quoted actually by us. This is actually over 25 years. Let's just get this in some proper context here. This is 21 billion over 25 years, 3/4 of it private investment, about 1/4 of it government investment. So, and set that against what's in here, which is I think something like 40 billion a year of private investment in mainly private investment in reaching 2030. So, look, I understand some of the issues, but I just want to set that context for you.
But isn't the argument very much that the industries who are the polluters should actually pay for that rather than the public so the polluters pay through industry levies or other measures, but they have a target to get to net zero too. Why isn't it the responsibility of the industry rather than the public?
Look, in some sense, I mean, it depends how you look at this. In some sense, the oil and gas industry are paying for some of this through taxation. I mean, if you think about the windfall tax that we've put in place, some of this is coming through taxation. But I think it's also the case, just honestly, with any first-of-a-kind technology, any new technology, if you're going to make it happen, there needs to be a partnership between public and private sector in this. If you think about offshore wind, for example, onshore wind indeed, solar indeed. When I was doing this job last time, we were subsidising it. Lots of people said, why are you subsidising this technology? And it was precisely this combination of public and private together that brought down the costs over time. So that will be, I don't know whether the Permanent Secretary had 2 hours on this at the PAC, and I know the Chair was there, he really enjoyed it. But do you want to add?
Well, I think that's right. Over the longer term, it should be possible to move away from the approach that we've adopted for these initial 2 clusters. But there is no way we could have attracted the investment that we needed without the form of the public-private partnership that we have introduced. I would re-emphasise again, the 21.7 billion is over the full lifetime of these projects. So it is over 25 years. Only a tiny fraction of the taxpayer funding, I think it's approximately 2%, as we discussed at the previous committee, is actually being spent before the projects are being delivered. We've had extensive negotiations to maximise the risk transfer, do that in an appropriate way, but also protect the consumer and taxpayer.
Also, I mean, look, you could say to the cement industry, well, there's no future for you in a decarbonised world, but I don't think we should say that. I think we should say, well, there is going to be a future for you in a decarbonised world. And how is the cement industry going to decarbonise without the proper use of CCS? Just to give one example among many that I could give, this is partly about our determination to make sure that as we decarbonise, it is a route to reindustrialising, not deindustrialising.
You mentioned cement. Do you distinguish between hard-to-abate industries, of which cement is one, and the longer-term production of hydrogen, and Barry Gardner will come on to other related questions about biomass in a moment?
I think both have a role. Look, you know, if you take Net Zero Teesside, the project there, we are confident that it will play a role in delivering, for helping us to deliver 2030 clean power in a decarbonised way. Now, we could be just saying, well, let's just have unabated gas, but actually that wouldn't be fulfilling our climate commitments. And I actually think this is the right thing to do. So look, I think both have a role. And you know, some people say, well, aren't you displacing renewables? I mean, I think I'm the last person to be accused of displacing renewables. I mean, we have absolutely maximal ambitions when it comes to solar and offshore wind and onshore wind and so on. But as I always say on these occasions, and it applies to, this is a debate we used to have about nuclear, you know, you need all of these technologies. The scale of this challenge that we are facing is massive. The scale of the electricity demand that we are facing is massive, potentially more than a doubling of electricity demand by 2050. If we're going to meet the scale of these challenges, we need all of these technologies at our disposal.
Indeed, and then it always comes to what is the most cost effective. And I think I asked, when you made the announcement, I asked you about difficult to decarbonize industries, but also waste. And whether, you know, shouldn't there be at least a prioritization towards those projects that are very difficult to decarbonize, or attach them to energy from waste plants, which are increasing across the country, rather than it allowing the oil and gas industry to continue business as usual?
I mean, I'm also an unusual person to be accusing of allowing the oil and gas industry to continue business as usual. That's something that's never been said to me before. Do you into scare quotes, as they say? Do you want to add anything?
We've had a very extensive process in order to select both the clusters and the projects that we are pursuing that properly takes into account the strategic case for carbon capture. We think there is a strategic case in all the sectors that we have agreed business models. That includes waste, of course, and indeed one of the lead projects is an energy from waste project, the Protos project, and that we've provided funding for in the HyNet cluster. We think carbon capture, though, can play a particularly useful role in the power sector. Small amounts add significant benefits to producing the least cost system. That is what NESO's advice told us. If we want to reduce whole system costs, so the overall capital and operating costs of the power sector, it will be cheaper if you have power CCUS, and also potentially hydrogen to power in the future as well. The chair raised cement. It will also have a particular role in these hard-to-abate sector, where there are very high process emissions from chemical reactions. At the moment, there is not really a credible alternative to abating these sectors other than carbon capture.
I would say, Secretary of State, I put that into speech marks.
We're going to move on, but thank you very much. Barry Gardner.
Chair, thank you very much. Secretary of State, you said in your opening remarks that you felt like an old stager.
Yes.
I guess that makes me an ancient stager.
Not at all, Barry, not at all.
Look, what I have learnt with age is that you take your opportunities when they present themselves. So yes, I do want to take the opportunity to thank you for your amazing championing of climate action over the past 20 years. Now, you probably feel a but coming. There isn't.
Always, Barry, always.
There isn't one. I want to ask you, though, to outline for us the process that needs to be gone through before your department can take a decision about future subsidy to Drax Power Limited.
Well, look, let me deal with the general and then come to the specific. I mean, look, on the general, thank you for your kind words, and right back at you, as they say, because, you know, your championing of this agenda, your leadership on this agenda has been incredibly important over the years and has huge respect, not just domestically, but internationally as well. On the question about Drax, you will know that the last government issued a consultation on these issues. Look, I'm going to be circumspect about this. We're a government that's 6 months in, and we are considering all of the issues that there are here. There are issues about the composition of our power mix going forward. There are issues about the potential role of power BECCS in the system. There are issues of sustainability, about which people have expressed concern, that need to be addressed. And there are issues about the scale of public subsidy that there has been to Drax, which also need to be looked at. So there's a whole suite of issues, and my reassurance, if it is reassurance to you, is that we are assessing all of these issues as we consider these decisions.
Okay, well, look, thank you for that. Let me try and get us down to more specifics. You've mentioned sustainability. Earlier today, I sent through to you at your department copies of 3 letters which I sent. One was to the Financial Conduct Authority, asking them to investigate whether KPMG had complied with their reporting and disclosure requirements. The second was to KPMG, asking them to publish the audit reports into Drax. And the third was to Jonathan Brearley at Ofgem, asking him to reopen the inquiry that you mentioned Ofgem had conducted. Now, it seems to me that the department needs to satisfy the public that the company is meeting the proper standards of sustainability, that your department's monitoring and assurance systems are now adequate. You'll remember that the NAO said previously they were not, to ensure the sustainability standards. You need to assure the public that there will be enough biomass globally to supply the UK without being reliant on sources such as North Korea, Afghanistan, Bhutan and the Maldives, which is what your own department's report said in August of last year, suggesting that that would have to be the case in order to ensure supply. I think the public are concerned about the remarks that Lord Burt made in the House of Lords, where he said he had seen deeply troubling evidence from whistleblowers at Drax of dishonesty and cover-ups as a company, and we need to get to the bottom of why somebody like Lord Burt believed that to be the case. And and the Ofgem inquiry, which reportedly did not have access to the damning audit report of KPMG, although it did receive 49 whistleblower reports. Many people believe that that should be reopened. And of course, we need to be assured that KPMG had complied with its statutory duties on disclosure under the Financial Reporting Council ISA rules that are relevant to the regulator's inquiry. Earlier today, E3G published a new report with Baringa, and we need to know that the enormous subsidy required by BECS is justified when that report shows that there are alternative, more cost-effective sources of generation that don't require the import from around the world of fossil fuels that are, or fuels that are questionable sustainability. Indeed. And the E3G have said that Drax biomass is not needed to reach Clean Power 2030.
There's quite a lot in there, Barry.
Well, I wanted to get it on the record because I wanted to be sure that you would respond to all of it, some of it in writing.
I think you've made your points that you wanted to get across, and I'm totally respectful of that, and you've put them on the record, and obviously we will look at the letters and the information you provide.
Thank you very much. That seems like a sensible answer, Secretary of State. Josh McAllister.
Thank you very much. I've got a few questions about nuclear, which we spent lots of time talking about, Ed, so good to be getting into it here. The first question actually is quite a specific one, and it's probably more for Jeremy than for the Secretary of State, but it's to do with arm's length body appointments. In quite a lot of the evidence that we've collected since the committee started its work, both through the NAO report into the work at Sellafield, they identified one of the things being the very long lead-in time to appoint the permanent chief executive at Sellafield. I think that was 15 months it took. And then we had evidence from the chair of GBN. Both the chair and the chief executive of GBN are still interim, I think about 2 years in. The committee's concerned about that and would like to see certainty for those organisations through permanent appointments. Is that something that's being tackled?
It's something the department takes very seriously. It can often be the right thing to do to make a temporary appointment. For example, when we were establishing GBN, I think it was exactly the right thing to do, as it was the right thing to do when we established Great British Energy. But obviously, over time, it is important to move to a substantive appointment. It's probably best to comment on GBN, which is the issue that you have raised. Obviously, Simon Bowen is an excellent candidate for the excellent chair of GBN. The department made the decision that we should conclude the technology selection process that's currently underway, which I suspect we'll come on to, before we made a permanent appointment. We wanted continuity through this phase, and we will intend to have a substantive process launching this summer.
No. Thank you. On the government's announcement earlier this week about AI growth zones, Secretary of State, there's a big link there potentially to the use of nuclear power in the future. The industry is waiting for two really important things which were long delayed under the previous government. One is the publication of an alternative routes to market strategy, and the second is EN7 and the planning framework that would allow that. In my view, I don't think they're spending review linked announcements, and I'd be really keen for those to be published as soon as possible to give confidence and certainty to investors.
Look, let me just say something, just sort of by way of opening on nuclear, and then come to your questions. I think I really want to just sort of put on record that we see nuclear as a really, really important part of the electricity mix going forward. And when I was Secretary of State last time, I wanted to drive forward nuclear, and we published a list of sites, and I think it's really sort of important, and it goes back to my point earlier about the scale of electricity demand that we are going to face. So that's the first thing I just wanted to say. Secondly, obviously, part of this for us is about driving forward Sizewell and SMRs, the most immediate things, if you like, on our plate. I think I want to sort of reassure you on both of those things, that they are very much sort of on our radar. On EN7, I'm hoping you won't have too long to wait. And on alternative routes to market, again, we want to drive it forward as quickly as possible. I said in my speech to the Nuclear Industry Association that my door is always open on these issues. It does go to the issues of AI that you've raised and the work I'm going to be doing with Peter Kyle. But our door is open. We want to drive this forward, and we recognise the role that nuclear can play.
Thanks. And then on looking ahead and goals, earlier on in this session we talked about the goals that are in place for solar and wind. The last government had a goal, I wouldn't say much of a plan, but a goal around 24 gigawatt of nuclear by 2050, and the current US administration has a 200 gigawatt nuclear goal for 2050, using the same logic that we have for clear goals to give confidence to the market and the supply chain. Is the government committed to a 24 gigawatt goal? Is it too low? When will the government make clear its intention on the nuclear mix by 2050?
Look, we share the spirit of ambition behind that goal. I want to sort of put that on the record. I think if I can be sort of diplomatic about this, I think it's perhaps easier for governments to say, here's our number for 2050, without really a plan to get there. And that's what sort of slightly concerns me about some of what the last government... I think Boris Johnson at one point, I know he promised lots of things, but I think he promised a nuclear power station every year, or maybe it was every month or something. So that takes me to my next point, which is order of business for us is to drive forward. Where my focus is Hinkley. Obviously, we need Hinkley up and running. Sizewell, SMRs. We've got the Strategic Spatial Energy Plan coming out in 2026 as well. You're absolutely right that we need to, beyond the 2030 clean power targets, we need to set out wider ambitions, and we will definitely do that. And as I say, I'm completely with the ambition on nuclear. I think it's got to be kind of properly grounded, properly evidence-based, and there needs to be a proper plan. Because I think it is one thing I learned, just going back to the question the chair asked me at the beginning, is that targets without plans, frankly, I think it undermines the confidence of investors, and that's where we want to get to.
Thank you very much. Luke Murphy.
Thanks very much, Chair, and apologies to the Chair and the Secretary of State and Permanent Secretary for being late to the session. I was in the chamber for a statement on the NHS. I wanted to ask you about public opinion and also kind of cross-party consensus. I think one of the things that people have always said in the past about the UK is that we have benefited from a cross-party consensus on climate. And I wonder whether you are concerned that that consensus is breaking down and the impact that it could have on climate action and public support for climate action.
Yes, I think, frankly, I am. And, I said at the opening, and no problem about you not being here for it, but I'm sort of old enough to remember when David Cameron was the Conservative Party leader in opposition, and vote blue to go. I was actually remarked on this to when I saw him a few months ago. Vote blue to go green was his slogan, and I think that sort of healthy competition on climate was actually a good thing from the point of view of the country. And I also said when you went here, that there are Conservatives since David Cameron, Alok Sharma, Theresa May, Chris Skidmore when he was a Conservative, Martin Callanan, I know, was a champion of these issues as an energy minister, who championed this agenda. And so the more Lord Deben, obviously, I sometimes say this to him, that growing up in the 1980s, he wasn't exactly a loved figure in our household. As a precocious child, I wasn't a great fan of his, but he played an incredibly important role as the chair of the CCC. I think as much as possible, we should be reaching across the aisle, as our US friends would say, on these issues. But there has to be a spirit of endeavour, of ambition, I think. And if it's a spirit of backsliding, then I think it's quite hard to maintain the consensus.
So on the public, do you think the government is doing enough to take the public with us in terms of what's the plans for a kind of public engagement strategy? And also, I think it's said, there's a lot of evidence out there that people want to see the green choice be the easy choice, incentives rather than sticks. Do you think the government is doing enough to enable people of all incomes and backgrounds and areas to actually choose to go green, to buy an EV, to buy a heat pump?
I think it's a really important thing to underline and to talk about, which is, I think there is, I said at the outset, I think there's broad consensus for this and support for this clean energy transition because people, I think partly because people recognise the scale of the threat, but also people recognise the reality of our exposure to fossil fuels, and that's what all the polling says. We have to make this work financially for people. That is the absolute precondition of taking people with us. If you think about the sort of heat pumps, I mean, heat pump take-up is up, but there's a lot further to go with the £7,500 grant. But this only works if we can say to people, you can replace your boiler with a heat pump and it won't cost you more. If we're saying to people we're going to come along and charge you thousands of pounds extra, we're just not going to take people with us in the transition. That is my strong view. And that is where the role of government. That's why our Warm Homes Plan is important. That is the role of government, because the role of government, the role of public expenditure, is what distributes these benefits and burdens in a way that works for ordinary people. And that it's true, by the way, on the consumer side, and it's true when it comes to workers. And so that is the fundamentals of this. And of course, it's hard. Of course, it's exacting to do this. But I think it's absolutely essential to answer your question.
Just on language, do you think net zero is a helpful term? We should continue to use it because it's become quite politicised. Should we be talking more about future generations and protecting the environment? How should we talk and communicate about climate change?
Look, I think there's different ways of talking about it. Net zero is quite a nerdy term, but as you know, that's my department, to be nerdy. But look, there's different ways of talking about this. I sort of think the terminology is... I think there's a sort of strange thing about this, which is I think Westminster sometimes underestimates the extent to which actually the public really gets this. All of the people... This is why I think, just to make a political point for a second, this is why I think when parts of the Conservative Party, to put it diplomatically, bark up the sort of culture war tree, I think they're barking up the wrong tree. It didn't work for them at the general election. It's not where the British public is. The British public don't want a culture war on climate. They want us to do sensible things. They want to do it in a way that financially works for them, and that's what we're going to do. So I sort of think, you can debate the terminology. I think the terminology is less important than the substance.
So just on targets and the kind of nationally determined contribution that the government set out, the CCC has said the UK is off track to meet the NDC by 68% by 2030. We've now got a more ambitious one, 81% by 2035. Is there a danger of trying to go too quickly? How are we going to meet that more ambitious target while also taking the public with us?
Look, the really important thing to understand about this, and this is the narrative that I use about the first limb of our mission and the second limb, is that this is right for future generations, but it's also right for current generations as well. If you think about the issue of transport, people are exposed to what's going to happen to oil prices, and we have no control over them. If you think about the issue of home heating, we're exposed to what happens to gas prices, and we don't have that level of control. If you think about industry, it goes back to this conversation about cement. The future for industry, the competitive future for industry is in decarbonising. And and there isn't a sort of status quo option when it comes to jobs. That's the point. And so the reason I say all that is because this is the jobs and growth story of the 21st century. If growth is number one mission of the government, if we're going to make economic growth happen, China, 1/5 of its growth in 2023 came from clean energy. This is the growth story. This is the energy security story. And this is the climate story. So all of those things go together. On the targets, these were targets legislated by the last government, both the 2030 NDC and the CB6, Carbon Budget 6, which we then translate into the Nationally Determined Contribution. They're hard targets. I mean, look, when we came to office, we were told that only a third of the targets for 2030 had credible plans associated with them. Now, you might say, well, why don't you just back off? But I think backing off would send a terrible message, not just on climate, by the way, but to investors. I'm not going to back off. But it's hard. It's definitely hard, and that's the work we're embarked upon.
Thank you very much. Bradley Thomas, please.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Thanks, Secretary of State, for coming. So, late last year, the NESO report assessing the system costs of delivering the Clean Power 2030 plan assumes a carbon price of £147 per tonne of CO2. That's the highest in the developing world, and I understand that it's £60 per tonne higher than the assumption that your department is working to. So, given your reliance upon the independence of NESO in the recent past, which assumption is your department working to?
I can write to you on the specifics around the carbon price. I think the important thing on the NESO report is what it shows about the potential for lower bills. I know you had Finton before your committee, but I can write to you in detail the carbon price.
Okay, assume that carbon price is is accurate. Assume that's the one that bears out in reality. What's your assessment, given that businesses are hurting? Given that in your opening words at the start of this session, you said that businesses pay the price if we get energy policy wrong. Your assessment on the extent to which that carbon price would hit businesses, jobs, investment?
Well, I'm not going to just endorse these assumptions in the way that you are suggesting, but what I am going to say to you is that we can definitely achieve 2030 clean power in a way that is good for business. And if you think about the response of industry right across the board to this document that we produced in December, whether it's in manufacturing or whether it's in the electricity sector or in gas, there is actually wide endorsement of this plan. And the reason there is endorsement of this plan is because people have been crying out for a framework and for certainty, and that is what we're providing.
Do you think it would be wise to ask NESO to do any more modelling?
We work with NESO all the time on these issues. We work hand in glove with NESO, I mean, not just on modelling, but on all of these questions, because they have a crucial role in the system, and they have a crucial role in helping us to deliver clean power. But I just got to be honest with you, the worst thing for business in the last few years has been their massive exposure to what happened when Russia invaded Ukraine, because that sent business costs absolutely through the roof. And there are businesses in my constituency and yours who haven't recovered from that. Small businesses, medium-sized businesses, large businesses. So if you're asking me, do I think that it's the pro-business measure is to back off, is to say let's just rely on fossil fuels, let's gamble, let's keep our fingers crossed, let's play in the fossil fuel casino and hope that geopolitical events mean that fossil fuel prices don't go up, I part company with you.
So, as I've got a bit of time, Chair, and given that Secretary of State has referred to prices and what drives business confidence, we see a lot of levies applied to one side of energy rather than the other. The government is pushing heat pumps, right? Businesses regularly cite to me that electricity prices are one of their biggest inhibitors day to day in terms of running costs, but also future investment plans. Do you agree that energy market reform is something the government should aspire to?
Absolutely.
Electricity market reform.
Yeah, absolutely. Are you talking about where levies are?
It would include where levies are applied, but also perhaps broader reform of the electricity market.
Well, look, that is definitely something that we are embarked upon, and I covered it earlier, and these are difficult questions. Look, on the issue of electricity prices, I think this is the potential, both for business and for families, of clean power by 2030, which is giving some certainty to business and others, giving that security that frankly they haven't had for a very long time and that I've referred to. I think, and I know the committee has looked at this issue around rebalancing. I mean, these are complex issues. The principled case is completely understandable, which is that you want to make electricity cheaper. Whether it's to do with families or businesses, we have to find a way to do it in a way that is fair and doesn't impose problematic burdens. And I believe, Chair, that you referred to the Nesta report on these issues. That's an interesting contribution to the debate. So this is definitely something that we are actively looking at, but I'm sort of being cautious about this because I think in all of these decisions, it goes back to my answer to Luke, in all of these decisions, we've got to make sure that we don't have unintended consequences.
Thank you very much. Polly Billington.
Thank you, Chair. Follows on from that, really. It's about obviously some of the risks, some of the issues around how you deal with the cost of energy for consumers. What more could the government do in the shorter term to lower, and it's very much in the shorter term, to lower the costs of energy for consumers from their current highs?
I mean, so look, the reality is that the best thing we can do in the shorter term is work with the companies to make sure that there is proper help for people. We have a warm homes discount in place for some of the most vulnerable. And then you get to issues like energy efficiency, insulation, which can make a difference, solar, batteries, all of those things can be part of this mix. I just got to be sort of honest with you. I wish there was a quick fix to these issues, but frankly, there isn't a quick fix. And we are, this is what it means to be on the roller coaster of global fossil fuel markets. There are things we can do, and we are constantly and actively engaged in the difference we can make to consumers and looking at how we can lower the costs that consumers face. But the reality is that unless we, the virtue of the system that we are talking about is it gives us that elusive word, control, of where prices are going to go. And so every solar panel we put up, every wind turbine we build, every piece of grid we build gives us that greater degree of control.
So what, if any, support is your department considering putting in place in the case that wholesale prices could spike again?
Well, we always look at these issues, and obviously there's direct impacts on it's got public expenditure and other implications, and we continue to keep under review the scale of the warm homes discount. The warm homes discount is our current measure for this. The scale of the warm homes discount, the group that gets helped by the warm homes discount, and we are always looking for ways, and this is work that Miata, my colleague, is constantly engaged in. We always look for ways that we can do more to help consumers.
It seems very clear that from what you're saying is you would be much more focused on targeted help rather than stuff that would help everybody equally across the board, like for example.
I mean, look, the way I think about this is that there is a degree of I mean, if you take the heat pump grant, for example, the boiler upgrade scheme, it's not a means-tested scheme, so there is universal help available, and we want to do more, frankly, to be able to develop the financing offer, working with the banks and others. This is something that will be part of our warm homes plan later on this year. The financing offer for the able-to-pay market, but it's also right to say that when it comes to most of public money and the support that there is, that should be in particular targeted on those most in fuel poverty. I mean, one thing that we've done since the election is said that we will ensure that all landlords by 2030, private and social rented sector, get their homes up to the equivalent EPCC or the equivalent, and that can take up to 1 million people out of fuel poverty. So that's another thing that we can do to actually make a difference on these issues.
Do you have any appetite for a social tariff?
I absolutely think social tariff is something that we need looking at. Different people mean different things by a social tariff. We have a sort of social tariff in its infancy, if you like, through the warm homes discount. But I definitely think that that part of what we need to be examining the case for and the ability for us to do in the years ahead is, if you like, a more fully fledged version of that.
One last question before we move on. As you'll be aware, my constituency in East Thanet, if you in Ramsgate, you're nearer France than you are London, so cooperation with Europe is obviously relevant, particularly in terms of greater energy cooperation and trading between the EU and the UK. What obstacles lie in the path to that greater energy cooperation? How might we overcome them?
Well, look, I think it is very much sort of part of the discussions that we're having about how we can cooperate for mutual benefit on these issues around energy. Clearly, we have interconnectors in place, which are part of the cooperation we do. If you go back to something like CCS, there is big opportunities for European cooperation. We're part of NSEC, which is a group that cooperates around the North Sea. So I actually think that this is a fruitful area where we can cooperate with France, but with other European countries as well.
Thank you very much. Claire Young.
Thank you. Secretary of State, you've talked a lot about clean power and its importance for lowering energy bills in the long term. But NESO's Clean Power 2030 advice warned that higher levels of CCS and hydrogen deployment could mean that the gas still sets the price of electricity in up to 47% of periods. Therefore, isn't it misleading to suggest to the public, as you've done, that the clean power will protect them from international gas prices?
So I followed quite a lot of the very interesting questioning you've done of NESO and of Emma Pinchbeck on these issues, and I'm going to try and set this out as clearly as I can. It's a complex area. I think this 47% can be a little bit misleading, because the extent to which you get the benefits of cheaper renewables doesn't just depend on what sets the marginal price. It also depends on the instrument that you're using to support renewables, whether it's CFDs or ROs, renewable obligations. And what is going to happen between now and 2030 is that more and more ROs are going to move off the system because of their lifespan, and CFDs will play a much bigger role in the system. And so that means that the benefits of cheaper renewables, because you're setting the price through the CFD, and it's not related to the gas price in a way that the RO was. So that by the CFD setting the price, you actually, if you like, bank a lot of these extra costs. So I think I understand why this 47% has been an issue in your deliberations, but I think we should be careful about not getting sort of too hung up on that, because that doesn't tell the whole story about translating the benefits of Clean Power 2030 into the prices people are paying.
May I add something to that? Because that's absolutely great. You have that lower inframarginal rents is how the economists would term it. But what NESO's analysis shows is that under the scenario with low carbon dispatchable flex, I mentioned this point earlier, actually whole system costs, which is the overall operating and capital costs of the system, that is the thing that ultimately will feed through to bills, are lower in the scenario where you have power CCUS operating, despite the fact that you have gas operating for that slightly higher number of periods, for the reasons that the Secretary of State has said. And you will also still have lower wholesale costs than you would have now, of course, because you've still got more renewables on the system.
Thank you. So a priority recommendation of the Climate Change Committee's progress report last year was to remove policy levels from electricity bills. And obviously there are several ways of doing this, such as moving them to gas bills or general taxation. What are your preferred solutions to make electricity cheaper?
Well, look, in a way, this was my answer to Bradley, if I'm allowed to use your first name, to Bradley earlier on. I think the Nesta report puts it quite well. There is a world in which you transfer all the levies to public expenditure. No doubt all of us in our fantasy world would like that to happen. It's billions of pounds worth of costs. I don't think it'll surprise the committee if I say that's unlikely to happen in the short term, given the fiscal situation that we face. So then we face this issue of where does the incidence of this fall, and these are the, and it is complex. These are the issues we're working through. You've got 100% of people, more or less, paying on electricity, and about 80% of people on gas. So if you're transferring the 100% to the 80%, you've then got a bills effect, a potential bills effect. And so that's the thing to work through on those people, on particular groups of people. So I'm being cautious because I think the principled case for these levies not falling on electricity is clear. The practical solution to make it happen is more complicated, and in a world where we need to protect fairness, as I said to Luke, we need to proceed cautiously.
And indeed, it will get worse if fewer people are using gas. Then that will become even worse.
Exactly.
So, one final question then: do you intend to progress the green mortgages consultation from 2020 to help private homeowners take on home energy improvements?
I mean, this is definitely something we want to work on. As I said, I think to Polly, working on these issues, it partly goes to, because it's important to realise the potential here. If you think about the potential around solar, batteries, heat pumps, I think we're underestimating the extent to which this can, with half-hourly settlements, we're underestimating the extent to which this can really make a massive difference to consumers and give people much more control over their bills and lead to lower bills. And so it's a sort of long-winded answer to your question. So the answer is yes, very much. Working with the banks and others to make sure that, particularly for the able-to-pay market, and indeed for others, we can find a way to help people finance this transition is absolutely key to making this transition happen, and doing so in a way that helps consumers.
Thank you. At the moment, there is going to be a ban on installing new gas boilers in existing homes from 2035. There are wide reports that you intend to scrap the ban. Can you let us know whether that's the case?
There isn't going to be a ban because Rishi Sunak, well, they never legislated for the ban, and then he said he wasn't going to do it. So, I mean, look, the answer is that we said in our manifesto we're not going to force anyone to rip out their gas boiler. Again, I just want to be sort of frank with you, Chair. I'm very cautious on these questions because, we can say to people, you need to get a heat pump, not a gas boiler, potentially at some point in the future. But I am very, very wary of saying we're going to stop people having gas boilers at a point when we can't guarantee that heat pumps are going to be cheaper for people. So obviously we look at these issues, but I was very clear when Rishi Sunak did two things in that speech in 2023. It's important to just to sort of set this out. He said that he was going to push back the clean power, ICE phase out, the petrol and diesel vehicle phase out to 2035, and we said we disagreed with him on that, and we were going to keep it at 2030. He also said that he was not going to go ahead with the previous thing that had been mooted on this 2035 ban on new boilers, and we didn't say as an opposition that we were going to reverse that, and we did, and I did that. We did that deliberately because my absolute bottom line is, we must proceed in a way that means we can say to people, you are going to be better off in making this transition. And I do not want to be in a position where I say to people, you must go down this road, and then people say to me, rightly, well, look, you're going to make me worse off. So that's our position on that.
Thank you for confirming situation. And can you say what will happen under the Future Homes Standard? Whether there'll be a mandatory ban on fossil fuel heating in new homes?
Well, look, the Future Home Standard is a matter for the for MHCLG, and they will be coming forward with proposals. I think the thing I would say about this is that there is massive advantages to us in, from the outset, ensuring that homes are built to a low carbon spec. And I think there is enthusiasm for this among the house builders. and others. And look, just to sort of give you the vision here, because I think it's important to talk about the positivities. There is one company that is working with the developer, with house builders, to say we will guarantee not zero carbon homes for 10 years, but zero bills homes for 10 years. I mean, which is a massively exciting concept for people. And that is turning the sort of prospect of zero carbon into a consumer benefit, and that's what we're about.
We've actually overrun your 90 minutes. You very generously
could have gone for hours.
Done that. We do have one more question. Well, that's great then. We've got one more question. Are you happy to take one more question? Annalise Midgley.
Thank you, Chair. Secretary of State and Permanent Secretary, I'm going to ask a couple of questions on jobs and workforce. So starting with the Warm Homes Plan, there's obviously like an incredible potential to create tens of thousands of jobs with retrofitting our homes, but at the moment those jobs that are insulating our lofts are often low-paid, non-precarious contracts. So how will this plan make sure that the green jobs that are created are good jobs?
Well, look, I think I'm really pleased we've gone into injury time or extra time, whatever it's called these days. I'm giving my age here, because I think you raise a wider point. I'll come to your specific, but I think you raise a wider point about the role of trade unions in this transition. And look, we have a different view from the last government, I think, on the role of trade union. I'm sure, in fact, on the role of trade unions in this transition. For this transition to work, it must command a coalition, which I think includes as many political parties as will be part of it, business, civil society, but also trade unions at the heart of it. And I think the prospect of good unionised jobs as part of this transition, for example, in the renewables sector, is really, really important to me as Secretary of State. But I think the point you make about homes and jobs in whether it's heat pumps or insulation or all of those things is really important. We'll be publishing our Warm Homes Plan later on this year, and absolutely the role of the workforce and a properly paid workforce will absolutely be part of it.
Thank you. Moving on to GB Energy, where you've said, and you've just said in your last question as well, that trade unions, there'll be a big role for them in GB Energy. That's very welcome. But there's little detail about what that actually means, and would you take this opportunity to briefly set out and maybe write to us in more detail about what that means?
Look, I definitely will. I think what I would say at a general level is we want GB Energy to be a model of what a good employer looks like, working with the trade unions. I know this is really important to Jürgen Meyer, who's the startup chair of GB Energy, and I'm happy to write to you in more detail about that.
Thank you. And I'll ask my final question on the domestic heat workforce, again, given the shortness of time that we've got. But briefly, you've mentioned the domestic heat workforce before in this session, but what is the plan for them? We've obviously got a ageing workforce, there's a skills bottleneck, and there's fears about future job security as well with the government decisions about home heating. So can you just briefly set out how is your department working with both industry and the unions to make a long-term plan on that?
I think it goes to this wider question, which is, in all of this, and this is the next stage of what Mission Control, led by Chris Stark, is going to be doing, workforce planning is incredibly important, because there is huge potential for jobs in lots of these areas, some of the areas that you've talked about, including in home heating. But, where are we going to get the people? How are we going to make sure that we have the skills mechanism in place? We have something called the Office of Clean Energy Jobs in my department, working with Skills England. There's huge amounts of data actually in the department about the needs that we're going to have, but making sure that we know what the demands are and that we have the mechanisms in place to make sure that we have that supply of workforce and that they can have the training that is required is absolutely crucial. I think one of the committee members, I think maybe the chair, remarked at a previous session that skills is a thing that often gets left off at the end of the discussion. This is absolutely crucial. And I won't do it justice today, but I think it's something that is sort of a really important area for the committee, because because there is the potential here, but the potential, you need to actually have the right mechanism in place to make the potential a reality.
Thank you. And you mentioned Skills England. There is a challenge in every sector of the economy, and the sector we're discussing is competing for the workers at all levels with every other part of the economy. How will you make sure that those workers come to fill the jobs that Annalise Midgley has just been talking about?
Explain the question again, sorry, Chair.
Well, the businesses that are trying to recruit workers and train workers to fit heat pumps, the oil and gas industry as well, they are competing for the same people who are being attracted to do engineering or technical jobs, or indeed work in the National Health Service also.
And this is the work that we're engaged on across government, working with Skills England, and my department is engaged in. You're right, it is a challenge. Look, in a way, I don't want to just be sort of rose-tinted spectacles here, but there is a massive opportunity. But I want to sort of assure you that, as I say, part of our job for the first 6 months was to get this Clean Power Action Plan out. The work that we are now undertaking is to make sure that not only do we have the right workforce in place to deliver, but that also it fits with all of the other demands on the workforce that there are going to be, and that we have the skills mechanisms in place to make sure that workforce is there where it is required by region, not just nationally.
Thank you. And a final question from Bradley Thomas.
Yeah, thank you. Sort of adjacent to that, and I want to, for avoidance of doubt, draw everyone's attention to my register of interest. I was formerly employed by a company that make home heating equipment. But in relation to the target for heat pumps and the step change required to hit the government's target, and particularly given that in that industry, if you or I, our boiler breaks down and we call probably our plumber, they're the sort of consumer advocate for whatever technology we install. So gas boiler manufacturers don't conventionally have a direct sales relationship with a consumer. Therefore, we are reliant upon the advice of our plumber or gas engineer. How concerned are you, Secretary of State, at the ability for us as an economy to deliver that step change in skills required, given that the typical age of a gas boiler installer is probably 50 plus, and they will very likely have retired from industry at the point that gas boilers are cessated from installation?
Look, I think you're right to raise this as a challenge, and I think it goes to sort of the more general challenge, which is to sort of, there's lively disagreement about the scale of where heat pumps can work and where they can't. But I think there is consensus that we're going to need a lot more heat pumps installed across the country. Look, I think this is doable. I think one of the things that we are pleased to have done is to be bringing in the Clean Heat Market mechanism, and to have worked with industry to overcome some of the concerns that they had over this, because it is now at least sort of coming in. And I think we're trying to found a new, because this only works if we kind of bring industry with us in this journey. And my fellow Minister Mieta Farnbull has done brilliant work on this to sort of bring industry with us. We've got the heat pump investment accelerator from the previous government. And look, we are determined to work with the industry and indeed on work on training the workforce. I think this is absolutely doable, but it requires sort of massive attention, and it is something on which we are focused as a department.
Thank you. Two more people have now indicated, so we'll continue for a little while longer if that's okay. Vera Hophouse.
Well, you're very generous.
I am generous. I think your chair is generous on my behalf, actually.
You have said very little about hydrogen.
Right.
And since I had a meeting with a gas grid, Wales and West Utility, who basically provide the gas in my Bath constituency, and this question really comes from them. We have heard relatively little about hydrogen in heating homes in the past, and they want to asks the question really, how do we ensure that fair policy decision making in the future on how the government intend to make an evidence-based decision on hydrogen for home heating. There were pilots, some of them have been stopped. They say they're hydrogen ready. There's also the opportunity to mix hydrogen with natural gas, which would have immediate benefits without having to change anything in home heating for consumers, since we are concerned about what consumers have to do in the future.
Look, in the interest of time, Chair, since we are in overtime, I'm going to be sort of relatively brief. Look, there's a really important role for hydrogen in our economy. We've sort of touched on it a little bit earlier on in relation to industry. This issue of hydrogen in home heating is something we are examining. We've said we will consult in 2025 on these issues. We said in our response to the Climate Change Committee, look, we need to get this decision right, and I'm not going to prejudge it, and we want to make an evidence-based choice on this. Just on the pilots that you're talking about, the H100 project, we're actually supportive of this project continuing because we think it can bring benefits for the wider hydrogen economy, and we expect the first homes will be connected by summer 2025 as part of this trial.
Thank you very much. And Mike Reeder.
Hi, thank you very much, and thank you for your time today. My first ever question to Select Committee.
Oh, well, I feel privileged.
It's probably a question for Jeremy, though, Ed, so I do apologise.
Oh, well.
I'm really interested in the spending review. How much work are you doing to make sure that there is a cross-government view on achieving net zero and other goals? Because I think it's been raised, you can't achieve climate resilience without DEFRA being bought in. You can't decarbonise transport without DFT taking some serious decisions around both public infrastructure and kind of haulage and logistics. So are we going to see a joined up spending review that really tackles climate across all departments?
I'm going to do something quite rare. I'm going to praise my Treasury colleagues, actually.
Always wise at this time of year.
They very much are putting the government's missions at the heart of their approach to the spending review, and we are working very, very closely with them to do that. And obviously, that does include the Clean Energy Superpower mission and the net zero part of that. So we're working very closely with ourselves, but with colleagues in the Treasury and with the other key departments like Department for Transport, MHCLG, Department for Business and Trade and DEFRA, to really make sure that we're joining up and able to produce for ministers high quality analysis of what the impact will be in terms of our climate and net zero ambitions. Of course, and the fiscal situation is tight. Everyone in this room knows that, and it's going to be very important that we prioritise and that we look carefully at non-fiscal levers as well. That is something that we are focused on.
I mean, I think it is worth just to sort of interject. I often say this to colleagues. Lots of people have lots of demands on me. Support this project, support that project, and so on. I think it would be wrong of me not to. It goes back to my exchange with Sir Christopher as well. Not to sort of say that we're operating in a very tricky and tight fiscal situation, and so there are obviously significant pressures when it comes to the spending review. But I would echo what the Permanent Secretary said, which is I think the Prime Minister having this as a mission, one of 5 missions, it just makes a really big difference in the priority it receives.
Okay, Polly Billington.
Sorry,
this is where you get annoyed at the referee.
We're not going to
beyond the time.
I was going to withdraw it because of what Mike said, but actually I think it's relevant because of what you said, Jeremy, about the non-fiscal levers. And I was initially going to ask the question about the future home standard in relation to that's MHCLG's responsibility. Increasingly, decarbonising our economy becomes a responsibility of other departments. You can set strong messages to the market, and sometimes those messages or the levers for doing that are not strictly speaking within your purview as DESNES. So what is the government mechanisms to ensure that decarbonisation is fully embedded into the actions of other departments, even if the primary responsibility for decarbonisation sits with you?
I think this is where we get to the exciting part where we can talk about mission boards. This is a bit that all the viewers have been waiting for. I mean, look, I do think that I do think that this is important, because it's not just that the Prime Minister has this as one of the 5 missions, but we have a mechanism, a mission board, which meets regularly, chaired by me, Deputy Chair, Pat McFadden, the Chancellor of the Duchy of Lancaster, with relevant departments, the key family of departments on these issues, to go over these questions. And my observation would be that what's good about these mission boards is it doesn't function quite in the way that cabinet committees have done in the past, in my previous experience of government, where they convene when there's a disagreement, which is the way that cabinet committees were a sign of trouble in the past. This is actually a way of cooperating on these questions. And my observation would be that in the key areas that really matter, in particular MHCLG, transport, DEFRA, DBT in particular, DFE because of the skills angle, there is real focus, and the Treasury, there is real focus and enthusiasm and understanding of the importance of this to the mission. They've got lots of other priorities, but this, the mission approach doesn't address every challenge, but I think is really, really important.
Thank you very much. Secretary of State, Permanent Secretary, thank you for your extensive answers and for giving us, extra time, almost penalties, and we got there in the end, but that is the end of our session. Order. Thank you.